Hey everybody, this is Don Mike, your host for Producing While Asian. Welcome back to this week's episode where we are featuring my good friend Vishal Vaidya. I went to college with him at American University, and he is known for his amazing singing skills and his journey to Broadway in Groundhog Day, the musical. So we talk about that. We talk about his new teaching studio for voice and his awesome brand that he has every October called Rifftober. So I hope you enjoy our conversation today on Producing While Asian.
What else should I be? All apologies. What else can I say? Everyone is gay. What else should I write? I don't have the right. What else should I be? All apologies.
Hi, Vishal. Thank you so much for being here today and part of Producing While Asian in season 1. It's so good to see your face and to have you here. It's very, very exciting.
Yay, I'm excited to be here. Thank you for having me on.
So we're just going to jump right in. So give our audience a little, because I already know you, but give our audience a little backstory of kind of where you came from in terms of the arts and how you kind of went through your journey and how you landed here. So I know that's a very big question, but it's internet world. We have a lot of time. So
Great. Well, you can hear sirens, which means I'm in New York. You can hear those in the distance. Hi everyone. My name is Vishal Vaidya, and I'm a performer and teacher, and I live in New York, and I'm from the DMV originally. I used to say DC, and by that I meant Maryland, and I'd say Silver Spring, Maryland, and by that I really meant Burtonsville, Maryland, which is a suburb of a suburb. And yeah, I grew up there. I went to school in DC at American University where I met Don Mike, and I've been performing ever since.
cool. Yeah.
It.
I mean, you've been performing, but I feel like you've done a lot in terms of performing. Like you've had some incredible experiences, like what, in the places you've gone through and the shows you've done. Talk to us a little bit about that journey as an AAPI person, and specifically someone of South Asian descent. Like how was that journey tackling the arts from that perspective?
I feel like it comes in a couple of ways. At first, it was really just tokenization. If that's a word, being tokenized. I've done The Secret Garden several times, which is just a token Magic Brown role in an otherwise lovely show, but that part of it is problematic. And at first that was kind of it. That was the only role there was in musical theater, other than a show which is specifically brown face, which is The Mystery of Edmund Drood. It's meant to be brown face, which is also not okay. That was it.
Right.
That was what the canon had. Mm-hmm. It had those two roles. And I had done that a couple times. I also, I was actually very lucky. My first equity show was originating an Indian character in the show at the Kennedy Center. It was this TYA musical called Mario Girl, and a friend of mine had been doing the readings of it actually up in New York. We met later, and the role was originally an East Asian descent character, and because I was a local to DC and they knew, they liked my audition, I guess they actually changed the role just by changing the name to make the character of Indian descent. And it was, the first time I'd ever experienced that. And it was very affirming just because I think it set me up for the love of new work and the possibilities of working on developmental theater and just affirming new composers too, because I think that's where I found this. That's where the space is where we can just be. There is still some tokenization. I'm just going to make that a word, but I think like increasingly what I've seen is, getting to be in shows where that I kind of call like third wave, where truly the role and the background of the character is fluid enough that it really doesn't matter, or flexible enough. And then shows where it's wholly about identity, and that's been really cool too. I've been working on readings of this show about Nelson Mandela, and I get to play. It's the first time I've ever played someone of Gujarati descent, which is specifically where my family's from in India. It's a South African Gujarati, Ahmed Kathrada, who was alongside Mandela in jail, but also later became the president of South Africa. And he, I had never been able to play anyone Gujarati before. And then later on, so twice in the last year doesn't count. In the last 2 years, I got to play someone Gujarati. I'm also working on another show also about nonviolence and freedom struggles, but also playing a Gujarati person in that. And so that's been really cool because I sort of never imagined it and didn't realize how much I'm like, oh, is this what it is to be just playing someone that you understand culturally, because you're not trying to fit into a box that is not meant for you. So I've been very lucky in that regard as far as performing. And with teaching, I've kind of been trying to do the same thing as far as just affirming people's voices. And I've been lucky to teach a lot of students of color, specifically a lot of Indian students recently, which has been lovely, because I think there's again this idea that we need to perform whiteness in whatever capacity that is, but it definitely shows up vocally in musical theater. So being able to just tell people that they don't have to do that and that they can find their own voices is really exciting to me.
That's awesome. So the question I've been asking a lot of the guests is, on a scale of 1 to producer, where do you land? And the reason why I asked that question is that there is no definition of what a producer is, right? Like if you're in music, a music producer is very different from a theater producer, is very different from a content producer. And so like in that kind of spectrum, where do you fall, especially with, all of your experience with performing? And like, where would you see yourself in there, and why?
Oh, like a 3.
Yeah.
Out of 10.
Yeah.
Because I think that there's a lot more I could do, and I think I'll be able to start to do. Definitely consider myself a 3. I mean, I have basically one little Instagram content thing that I do called Rifttober, and I've started to put out some teaching videos online, some digital content there. But as far as producing, like what I define producing as for myself is really like investing money in products that will then provide a return, is the like high end producing, and I'm not there. That's commercial producing, I guess, really.
Yeah.
And then there's also the line where I'm at, where it's like, is it producing content, or is it being, I've been thinking about performing in a couple of ways, particularly with theater. There's interpretive art, and then there's generative art. And I'm starting to be a generative artist, which is harder in musical theater because it's such an interpretive art form. And I think a lot of people have identity crises with not being artists when they realize that they are interpreting and not generating, but I think both are completely valid. So in that sense, I am starting to create more content. I've started some writing projects and, these teaching things. Yeah, I definitely still don't feel like I'm a producer. I would not necessarily add that to the hyphenate.
Sure.
What I do.
Yeah. So, and that's why I love doing this, because I talk to people from all different parts of our industry. And so it's nice to get a perspective, from the other end of the scale too. So like, in your experience in the arts, what would you like to see? Trying to rephrase that question. I guess as a person who's mostly a performer, like what would you like to impart upon any producer, really? Obviously there needs to be like more representation for us at the table, but if you had like the ears of all of the like high-end producers, right? Like what would you tell them, and like what would you encourage them to do in terms of like, now that we've had this what people are calling a reset kind of in our industry with the past year. How do you, from a performer's perspective, how can these producers re-enter the space better than when we were forced out of it?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I don't know if I would talk to them because I don't think they care, because it's their job is not to affirm different voices. Their job is to
make money,
put money behind a project and have it make money. I mean, that matters because that is their job. If they fail at that in service of something, this is why capitalism kind of doesn't work in art, right? And commerce and theater don't work. And you see it with what Broadway's become. It's really, it's kind of high-end theme park. And I'm not saying that to like throw shade. It's just what the brand has become, because it's had to evolve to that. Ticket prices are super high. Shows are really expensive. Families are not willing to risk. And also at the same time, because of streaming, you have people who would be producing movies and music now becoming Broadway producers, because that's the space where they can continue to make money. So all of those things are sort of converging, and what you see is heavily branded low risk projects like all of these bio musicals and things, which are still, I mean, they're still risky. Some of them do better than others, but as far as the creating new work, it's not really, it's actually all older work and pre-existing work. And what that means is that there's no space for AAPIs, really. So if you want that, then you have to look to, then it's about decentering Broadway, which is why I said it doesn't even matter. They can't be included because they're not actually a part of the conversation.
Sure. Yeah. No, that makes sense.
And off Broadway, I mean, the right before the pandemic slowed everything down, there was this amazing emergence of a lot of really great Asian American art. The week before things shut down, March 12th, I think, was the day things shut down. March 9th, I saw The Endlings at New York Theater Workshop, which was this amazing show about 3 Korean American women on this island. And it was so smartly done. And, you never get to see Asian American women a certain age in theater. And this was really beautiful. And then I saw Cambodian Rock Band, which was just like, it was sexy. The music was great. It was really playful. It was a moving story. It worked, everything about it. And that was the last show I saw. And so I kind of saw the stuff already happening. I think this is the problem, is that Broadway, we keep looking to it to solve the problems, and it's never going to, because capitalism just doesn't work that way. They're not going to care. And, it'll take time until it becomes a money issue.
Right.
And so then it's like, then you have to make it a money issue.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Like, so now that we're kind of coming back into the theater world, and we can talk about all theater, like outside of Broadway too, like regionally and kind of at the local level, do you think there's now more room to produce things that are Asian focused? Do you think there's more of there's always a need for it, but I want to say, do you think there's space for it now that we're kind of refiguring what is now that space,
Yeah, I think there should be room for everyone. And I think it's going to be a tricky situation, like who makes those decisions is going to have to change. And so I think less than, this is where DEI work becomes so important, is that like diversity isn't enough. Casting 2 brown actors in your show is not going to change that the lens is for a white audience and through a white writer's eyes, and that's been the status quo. So to change that, you have to think about what board members at regional theaters are going to say, and who's on the board of those theaters, and who's directing, and who's writing, and who you're bringing into your emerging artist spaces. Like basically, it's very complicated, but I think the regional theaters actually are set up to do it better, depending on the region. But there are a lot of at least in cities, I think there's a great setup because the product is not geared toward a limited or an unlimited run, like say on Broadway or off Broadway in some instances. So I think because of that, it's really about highlighting the writers, the piece, and so focusing on new work there is going to be great. But also because of the pandemic, a lot of people have moved out of New York, which is great because there are actors everywhere. They're always on. There are more now than there have been, and I think regional theaters should seize that opportunity to create more and more art. I don't know that it means that, I don't know what it means as far as like the vehicle of new work and the end goal being New York. I don't know that that needs to be the case. I actually think it means that regional markets will flourish, and and this is where it becomes a money thing.
Right, money.
Focusing on different writers and having different people behind the table is going to be super important. And that's not just AAPI folks. That's Indigenous people and Black people and trans. The trans lens is super important. And accessibility, having people who have different, neurodivergent people, all of that is really integral to creating more accessible and affirming theater space. And I think that that is kind of happening already, and it already was happening, but I think there's obviously a lot further to go, and democracy is slow, which is good in some instances, but I think now what's great about the We See White American Theater and other justice organizations that are really meaning thing is that now we really have things to hold people to account for. So when that's not happening, there's a clarity based on the work that a lot of amazing people have done, where you can see when it's happening and when it's not, which is great.
Yeah, for sure. And I really have appreciated seeing, good change, unfortunately, usually comes out of something terrible. While I'm really thankful of the last year, I'm so happy to see organizations like We See You, White American Theater, and even all the way to like Unapologetically Asian and Racism is a Virus, just really being loud about what needs to change. And because obviously it came from a period last year in 2020 that was really hyper focused on injustice against Black Americans and African Americans, and now we're in a period of injustice against AAPI people, and it's luckily we're able to continue that conversation with people about what things can change, and specifically in our industry, but also like in the world in general.
Hi, my name is Sam Post, owner of Phenomenal CBD Store and PhenomenalCBD.com. That's like phenomenal, CBD.com. Tune in where we talk with experts about how the amazing hemp plant can make a difference for people's health and well-being from the Press Play Podcast Network.
Hi, I'm Vishal Vaidya, and you're watching Producing While Asian.
For you now, as an educator, as somebody who's teaching students, and you also mentioned you're seeing a lot of BIPOC students, what are you, in terms of working with them and kind of speaking directly to the youth of America, like what are you hearing from them? Like what are you kind of seeing in terms of their artistry and what they want to do in their direction? And what's your hope as the person who's kind of helping guide them along their journey?
Oh, that's complicated. I think it depends on the student. I
Sure.
think,
let's say AAPI students or South Asian students, like what are you hearing from them?
yeah, I mean, I think that's even depending on the student and their goals.
Sure.
But I think in general, the thing that I try to instill is that to be process focused rather than product focused for them.
Mhm.
And like, I teach voice, so about vocal curiosity rather than getting performance ready. Cause I think that if you're not there and you think that you'll never get there, but if you start from a place of curiosity, then you'll keep discovering. And I think for South Asian students, for the basic students that I teach, it's really about like identity and being able to bring in your Indian identity into your voice practice, even if it doesn't mean you're studying Hindustani singing. You can still sing Indian music in a voice lesson. You can be Latinx and sing ranchera songs. I have a student who just has been working with me on a song, and that's okay to bring into a voice lesson. It's okay to sing something in Tagalog if you want to, because that should be as legit, quote unquote, as something in Italian, something in French. That Eurocentric approach is no longer valid, and it doesn't serve everyone. And maybe it's just old guard, and I think we need to change that. So for me, that's what really I'm trying to do, is bring in, just affirm everyone's background and to acknowledge that like it's okay to be you in the space, and who are you as a singer, as a vocalist, as an artist, and how do you create, how do you discover who you are in a space that is affirming everything, so that you don't have to deny part of you, which I did for a long time because I didn't know that it was possible to be a musical theater performer, because all we knew was, Sondheim, and that's all valid and fine, but it's, there's just no place for me in that, in large part, unless the lens of the show and production are geared toward, there's some spin on it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think what I'm hearing a lot in what you're saying, and it's totally right, and I think it really applies to producing too, it's that I think in the performance space, we're learning that it's okay, like that phrase, it's okay, like to identify, it's okay to be what you want to be, and sing the way you want to sing, and tell people that you're, AAPI or trans or whatever. And I think it's seeing performers do that, and tell me, your opinion on this. Like, I feel like it's informing producers. It's informing producers to say, all right, well, it's okay now to maybe start producing more of these stories and presenting more things and funding more things that talk about even, beyond individual identity, but in intersectionality, because there's a demand for it now. And that's, unfortunately turning the industry into a product, but that's kind of where we're at with things usually. So, what do you think about that?
Yeah, I think that's happening. I mean, I think we'll see the fruits of that labor in like several years, but it was already happening. I mean, like writing, what am I trying to say? Places that nurture writers, emerging writers, I think have always been forward thinking. It's just getting those people into the rooms and with the people that have the money can be hard, because those emerging writers, those sort of incubators have some money, but they don't have the big money. And they're often the tool for people to showcase their work to those with big money. But getting in those rooms can be hard, and you still have, now it's really, we're in an interesting space, because with Broadway, it's like, who are the Broadway composers? There are no original, there's not really much original music on Broadway anymore, which is why, again, I say we kind of have to decenter it when we talk about the art form, because it's not where the musical theater trained writers are really working, because there's no acting, because it's all kind of pre-existing music. So the composers are really working off Broadway. And what's cool about now is even in that space, it's still kind of closed doors and it's hard to know who's, because it takes so long for a musical to develop. But the organization I work with, Broadway for Arts Education, brought into one of their youth have a weekly art share, and they brought in the writers of the Bridgerton musical. And what they were saying was so interesting about how TikTok has actually created this democratic space, low D democratic space for writers to really be able to showcase their work to a wide audience and have popularity boost the credibility of writing teams like that, or the Ratatouille musical. That's democratizing what the art form is, which is also really important. In addition to, the who, it's also how. And I think the how is about democratizing. And I think social media, places like Clubhouse are going to be really important in hearing from different people, but also honing talent and nurturing writers as they create whatever is going to be next.
For sure. And it kind of started a little bit with like the craze around, and speaking specifically to like social media and how that's kind of pushed things, and kind of YouTube at first. It kind of began with Hamilton and also with Be More Chill, and Be More Chill being the bigger example of the two, where those shows really kind of it went viral in a way. And specifically Be More Chill, where I went through the Commercial Theater Institute, and it was the year that Be More Chill was on Broadway and was buzzed about and was supposed to be the one that won all the Tonys. So they talked specifically about the video that went through the roof in terms of views, which was I believe it was the Michael in the Bathroom song. And all these kids started singing, and then all these kids started telling other kids. And so it's kind of, I feel like we're in that crux too. And so kind of to your point about TikTok and now Clubhouse, it's making it more accessible, even more so, where theater isn't just this far out thing that only people with money know about. It's now coming down, and people are seeing it in the social media feeds and on TikTok. And speaking of Clubhouse specifically, which I'm still trying to figure out how Clubhouse works. I was like, am I old now? Where like you can be in a room listening to something, and anyone can be pulled up to speak to whoever is in the main room. And so I feel like that's valuable for writers who might be looking for feedback or talent or whichever. So I feel like maybe in the next few years, we're going to be in a place where we'll finally discover those new writers and those new composers that can move up the ranks, and, whether it be from regional to off Broadway or off Broadway up to Broadway, who knows? Maybe we're breaking down the hierarchy just a little bit with what's going on.
Yeah, I hope so, because they're already, mostly what I do is work with those writers, and they're all like so talented, and the work is really deep and rich and necessary. That's the other thing, is like the work that's necessary, that's actually speaking to what's happening in the world, is not really happening on Broadway either. Because, again, it's because I think, unlike a movie where you can like turn it on and watch something sort of visceral and evocative, and on Netflix or even in a movie theater, that's only $15. But to risk for a Broadway ticket, it's so expensive. Like for a family of four to go to New York, pay for a hotel, see a Broadway show, they probably want to escape a little. And so
right.
Even if it's something, like the Tina Turner musical probably has a lot of poignancy to it. Her life is remarkable. That's not to deny that, but I think that as far as original new stories that are speaking to now, it's rare that those in musical theater are on Broadway. And I think that's evident in A Strange Loop winning the Pulitzer Prize, because there's not really new work happening on Broadway that is worthy of that prize.
Right.
It's not original. anymore.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's that idea of trying to find like what I guess what producers deem is worth it, right? Like, and there's plenty of original content out there. It's just, finding those key, like you were saying earlier, those key players to say yes, and and to take the risk of like, all right, well, I'm either gonna tell people about this or I'm gonna fund this to hopefully give it some air so that it kind of moves and see who gets drawn to it. And now you're kind of helping craft the next generation of performers, and it doesn't, not necessarily Broadway, just people that are performers of color, and giving them that confidence to go out there and be seen, but also demand the content that they need to be employed in if they're going that route. It's kind of giving them that power, which is really cool.
Yeah, it's been exciting, and I'm actually working on my first show on a creative team that I probably can't talk about, but it's going to be the first show that I've ever seen that is going to be a vehicle to train South Asian performers, because we don't have, one of the reasons I think visibility is so low in the South Asian community, specifically on Broadway, is because there's never been a show where we can train into, like,
like a Miss Saigon, right? Like with it, everybody can go into, right?
King and I, like, you could, I mean, not that everyone does this, but like you could be a young kid and do the King and I, and then do Miss Saigon, and
yeah, I mean, we have friends who that's their trajectory. They started as a Tam, and then they became bar girl number 5, and then became Gigi, and then became Kim, and they just have been in that show their whole lives because it's employment. And you can say that about anything, but I agree with you. Like, there's no South Asian musical that's like that. And on my end, there's specifically no Filipino musical like that, because all the Filipinos are in Miss Saigon. So
right.
we don't have one either. And so, yeah, I see what you're saying.
And so this show is hopefully going to do that for the South Asian community. So I'm really excited about that.
That's cool.
And I think, as someone who wants there to be more change, I actually am excited that I'm not in the show, because it feels like I get to be a part of the training of the people. Which is exciting, because I think it's like, in addition to just the physical act of the training, it's also creating the environment that affirms them. So it's not like, you need to fit into this box. It's
right.
Like, no, we have, there's a movement vocabulary and a world of a show and all of that stuff. That's true for everything, but also the environment, like a non-toxic environment. And the creative team is amazing. It's a really good group of people, so I think that is going to be the case. But it's very exciting, because I think then we'll see more representation, and we'll see the effects of that, not just in 5 years, but in 20 years, of who is on stage and who is, who's writing. This is a very diverse team of musicians and writers and choreographers and everyone. So
for sure. Yeah, like, I would love to get to a point in our collective industry's history where having a show that features people of color like us is no longer a novelty, like that it's the norm, right? That it's just, okay, great, there's 4 shows on or 4 shows in the cycle that are bring in South Asian people or bring in Filipino people as themselves, and it's in like a totally like awesome story that you want to hear about, but it's not like pain and suffering, it's like something that's like a little more normal, so to speak. So I feel like it's just steps like what you're talking about with this show, which I'm very excited to see, hopefully hear about it when it's allowed to, like things like that that'll help move us toward that normalcy of having characters that are played by us be normal and just be part of the story, rather than having to have a whole process on the production side of like, okay, well, which character are we going to write that will be that character that is played by someone who's brown? Whereas it's just like, they just are, So.
Yeah. And it's an interesting time we're in right now, because I think the pendulum has to swing too far before it's just like normal. And I think that means, I think the specificity of the writing required is amazing. And I worry that sometimes with acting, the industry, at least the actors and the acting community, is a little like, how dare that person play this role? They're not exactly this person. And I think that's the area where we might have to go too far into what's true in order to swing back into, suspension of disbelief again, because I think there is a line where it's like, well, we are actors.
It is a musical.
We're playing pretend. Who gets to play pretend? But I think we, like, can I only play Gujarati gay men? Then I would have,
right.
That, when will that happen?
You have no work. Yeah, you wouldn't work anywhere, right?
So finding that line is going to be tricky as we enter a space where we are looking to affirm different types of people, because it's like, well, who gets to claim those identities?
Right. Yeah. And it's such a complicated conversation, because it's also super sensitive, where you're like, okay, well, you have to be very careful and handle it with kid gloves, so to speak, because like you don't want to. I'm trying to think of like issues that happened recently, but it's been a year. So I'm like, what's happening? Where, if you're trying to, for example, if you're trying to write a trans character, like there's been a lot of that in the past couple of years. Like, we want to write this trans character, but we're not going to hire a trans person to play this role. Or even, I know, most recently with The Prom, we're going to write about a gay character, but we're going to have James Corden play it. When, you could have had somebody, and that one's like a little more messy, right? Because it's like, he's a white man, and like, we're usually not debating over white men. But in this case, James Corden versus Brooks Ashmanskas, who was wonderful on Broadway, like, why? Yeah. And he was great. And so you get into that, in the weeds with that now, where you're like, okay, with trans, it's a little more clear. With gay, it's harder, because there are plenty of gay actors that can play gay people, but then you get into the producing conversation of like, are we talking about star power? And like, we're going to put James Corden there because he is James Corden, because we think, and I'm not talking for anyone, but like just in general, there was probably a conversation where it was like, we think Brooks won't pull in as many viewers because it's Netflix. So, which I would watch if it was him, but but of course I know who he is. So
yeah, but it's also, I think with sexual orientation, that's an area that's super muddy versus like gender,
like African American, Asian, so.
Or race or gender identity. But I think sexual orientation specifically is muddy, because like, I don't know what James Corden's done in his life. I can't.
Right.
That's making
you don't like wear your sexuality. You know what I mean? Like you wear your race, you wear your identity, but you don't wear your preference, your sexual, identity. So that's another debate. But
I do think there could be more gay representation from gay actors playing gay roles, of course. But I don't.
But also, sorry. Yeah, that's okay. And also, like, gay identity within that community. So, like, we've seen gay white guys all day, every day for like forever. So, like, when are we going to see more gay people of color, trans people of color? And in that situation where, okay, falsettos, cool, but like, when are we going to see like an Asian falsettos? Not that story, but like something similar. When are we going to see things like that? Because we're seeing it in film, or all that kind of stuff. Like the movie Lingua Franca was a movie about a trans Filipino woman who, and her journey, played by the actual person, Isabel Sandoval. She's in New York. You should meet her. I hear she's awesome. And, when are we going to see more of that? Like, in terms of representation? And I think you and I can agree from a performer's point of view. We're just like, I want that. Like, where's that story?
And then it's about, like, this is why I'm like, well, then we have to start writing it ourselves, because if we
Right.
don't see it, we have to create the change. And that's why, for me, like with teaching, it's really important to not just pigeonhole people into a type of artistry that they can do. Like, yes, technique is important, and you have to excel just for your own, to create standards for yourself that you can reach. But also, like with musical theater, I think there's a problem in the training that it's geared toward, like, you need to be able to do a triple pirouette, and you need to be able to, sing this high. And it's again, it's capitalism's fault, but it's like, well, if we actually make every musical theater program a generative program where everyone is not only performing and working on all those things, yes, they're important, but also writing and composing and choreographing, then what, we could change a lot.
Yeah, for sure. I agree. I think and of course it's an ongoing conversation, like how do we keep reforming our artistic education system to do that, where I feel like, personally speaking, if I had more kind of influence in college about, even like an elective about like what is being a producer, I feel like I would have learned much sooner in my life that, like, maybe I'll do this first instead of pursuing performing, which I don't regret it. I think I came to that decision in a different way, where I just said in another interview where I said to them, I became a producer because I was tired of people telling me what to do, and like tired of people putting me in a box in that sense. And so, but I feel if there was a place in college where they're like, well, if you take this elective and just learn a little bit about that, maybe it wouldn't have been because of that. It probably would have been like, oh, I know what that process is like. So, and that can be applied to any tier of our collective industry. Like if we, like, for example, at AU, not knocking AU, but if we had like a better dance program when we were there, maybe we'd, be better at that. Or if we had a little more tech insight, like we'd have people who would be better and more in the stage management and production side of things. So,
it's hard with that. I've actually been interviewing for a couple of jobs in colleges, and it's been interesting to see it from the other side, because it's like the bureaucracy is so much, and arts funding is just, in America, it's just underfunded, and arts programs at school, like, to retain numbers, like you have to choose if you're going to be highly competitive or if you're going to let a lot of people in to maintain your numbers. And so even like, getting an elective at AU, which is not really a competitive program, it's hard for them to justify that, because if only 5 people sign up, then they can't do it. So it's about the numbers. That sucks, because I think that's not what education's about. That's a larger educational issue of what college has become in our country, which is just a business. And I mean, there's a point to it, but I think that if we can ingrain the curiosity and like give people the resources to kind of work on everything they want to in the arts, which is hard. I don't know how.
Yeah, it's hard. There's a lot.
There's a world that's doable, but I think that's what it should be. I mean, if you're paying $200,000 for an education, you should be able to get that. You could get so much private instruction in New York. And
absolutely.
Live,
and live.
So it's like, why can that happen? If you're aggregating resources, but I think what you get at schools is like your dance studios and not paying for practice rooms and that side of things. It's like easier, and also we don't know anything when we're 18. But I think it's complicated, and I don't think. I mean, education needs to undergo a lot of reform, but I don't think most schools they're going to be 20 years behind just because.
Exactly.
Hey, it's Tito, host of the Premier Fantasy Podcast. Get all the news and analysis you need to dominate your fantasy league. I've been doing this as long as anybody in the business. I can help give you the edge in your leagues. It's the Premier Fantasy Podcast, part of the Press Play Podcast Network.
You've been pining, you've been waiting for Rega and Rhoda to get back together. We got you. Press Play Podcast. We're ready to go. We're going to have our podcast with everything that you want. Browns, Cavaliers, Indians, Ohio State, the national scene. Kenny Rhoda, Michael Regai back together again. Make sure you keep your ears open. It's happening right here on Press Play Podcast. See you then.
Cages are the same in every part of the world. Some are metal, some are tall. You've seen one, you've seen them all. And a wall is just a wall, is just a wall. And they're all, a wall is just a wall, is just a wall. And they're all, a wall is just a wall, is just a wall. And they're all the same. Hi, I'm Vishal Vaidya, and you're watching Producing While Asian.
So, did you ever see yourself going into kind of the career path that you're headed down now? Because I know when we were in school together, and even in the couple of years after that, you were very focused on performance and going that route. And I know all of us as artists at some point, we enter into being teaching artists and mentoring and all of that. But did you ever think that you would kind of come to this point where you're like, oh, I actually want to go and start my own studio and, really, mold the skills and minds of young people? What are your thoughts on that? Like, I know a lot happens in our careers because we just fall there based on where we've been. But, how are you feeling about that? And kind of, did you see yourself being here, doing this part of our community, so to speak?
No, but also it now looking back, it makes perfect sense because I've always been kind of nerdy, and this has made me feel nerdy again. And so in that sense, I'm sort of like, this actually is exactly what I've been missing in my life. But I was super focused on performing, and I think part of that is because there's a big problem with the performer identity, because people think, and I was this way, like I had a fixed mindset about it, that like, that like there can't be any plan B, which is true, but there came a certain point where the way I was performing and the way I was hustling was just, I was running myself ragged. I was tired and I was unfulfilled. And so actually I started teaching like 4 or 5 years ago, but I sort of really dug deep in the fall of 2019. But it was also kind of out of necessity. It was like, I need to get into a place where as a performer, I have freedom again to choose projects, to say no to things, because if you're an actor and you want to work full time as an actor, then you might have to say yes to a project that you don't believe in, so that you can get your health insurance and get your money, and that has its own set of challenges, and it can be great. Like there's so many actors who work full time, like doing different shows and traveling around the country. But for me, especially with the work I want to do, and talking about all of this, like I can't just go do a summer stock production of something and filled, because that's just not where my soul as an artist lives. It has to feel like it's moving the ball forward somehow. And so I found a lot of communities in New York that, with developmental work, or, even the work at New York City Center, which it is a lot of older shows, but it's sort of excavating them and celebrating them for what they were or what they can be, which I think is really great. But if it doesn't have that specific spin on it, I don't actually care about the shows. So, I was doing a summer stock production 2 years ago, and it actually kind of broke my heart, and I was super unhappy. And I realized it was because I just didn't feel like there was any point to it for me. It was a turning point because I realized that I need to be in a place where I don't have to do that. So I'm getting there. Exercising. The other thing is with artistry, it's like it's such a saturated market, and there's always people, there are like 50 people who will take your job. So in that sense, like, you should say no, but there's a lot of scarcity. There's a scarcity mentality. And so then there's ingrained this need to say yes to everything. And I'm saying yes to really trying to listen to myself and say yes to the projects that I believe in. So teaching is definitely that for me. I love it.
Yeah.
True. Yeah.
That's awesome. And I feel like it goes both ways too. Like, I feel like if I was in college and there was an AAPI vocal instructor, I would gravitate towards you because I'd be like, oh, like, we identify, and he might have experienced things that I might need to know about, or you could impart wisdom on me that, would help me in my career. And like, not to, downplay any of the vocal teachers that we've had. They're great. But it's kind of like when you're finding a therapist too, like, would you rather do therapy with somebody who hasn't shared any experiences that you have, or would you rather do therapy with someone who has? I feel like there's value in that too, where maybe more BIPOC, LGBTQ plus students will want to go out there and do more because they will have had somebody like them teaching them. So, kudos to you for starting your vocal studio and doing that. It's a big endeavor, I know.
It's been exciting. I mean, I think I have a long way to go, but like, I'm slowly building clientele. And honestly, this pause has forced me to really do it more. For the first time ever, I'm able to get by without a show, which means that when I do shows, they can be fun again.
It's what you want, right? Yeah.
Yeah, in a way, like Elizabeth Gilbert says in her book, Big Magic, that you can't put pressure on your art to make money. And that's really true. And I think I have been trying for a long time to find another thing that works in tandem with performing. And I've always really been a teacher. I just never realized it until like 4 years ago. So it's been cool to just get to do it, but I do have a long way to go and a lot to learn, which is exciting. Yeah.
So, like, selfish question on my end. It's more jokingly so. Like, it's my way of asking you to talk a little bit more about it for the listeners that are that heard it earlier that don't know what it is. Will Rifftober be a required activity for your students? Like, required participation in October, and then talk to us about Rifftober, because I know what that is, but I know people listening are like, what is that? Like, who, if you haven't heard about it or participated. So it's kind of like a two-prong.
Yeah, so I'll answer it in reverse. Rifftober is silly Instagram, I don't know if it's a challenge or a celebration of vocal riffs that I started in 2013, I think. Honestly, it was because I wasn't doing anything, and I was like, I need help. So I just started doing like a riff a day. And then I realized I was, again, holding myself to this standard that I didn't want to achieve. And I was like freaking out about getting a riff in every day, and it stopped being fun. So now I just do it in October. And now it's become even more of a teaching thing. But will I require it of my students? Probably not. Because what's cool about, what is cool about that is because of who I know in the theater community, I've been able to put that niche, like riffing has become this niche sector of voice teaching that I do. And it's a cool area where technique and style really meet, which I think is something that I'm trying to ingrain in a lot of people, is that like, you need to have both. Because if you don't have a point of view, you can have all the technique in the world, but like, if you can't root yourself in the music, then there's no point. If you don't have something to say as a singer. So yeah, I think what's cool about it is it is the natural progression into what I'm doing now, which is I've been, in the past year, I've gotten to work at about 10 colleges and give riff master classes and work with the students.
Nice.
And what riffing is, the technique is really just being curious and exploring all the different pathways into sound so that you can sing one thing a dozen different ways and it's all valid. so you never have to feel pressure to do it the same way over and over again. And you know, I think I could talk forever about riffing. People have a lot of because we see a lot of showy riffs from Christina Aguilera and, you know, Mariah Carey and people like that. People think that it needs to be that, but really what it does is gives you control, freedom, and puts you in the driver's seat of your own voice, which is what I'm trying to preach, I guess.
Yeah, no, that's great. And it's because when we were in school, we weren't taught that, you know what I mean? Like it wasn't part of the curriculum, and people who could do it, great, but it was never like, okay, let's talk about that, or like, you know, specifically, you know, especially in voice lessons, we were more focused on technique. There was expression, but it was more a technique.
We're focused on
exactly
style of singing, and this is the thing that I'm trying to. That a lot of schools will eventually change, but you know, it's bel canto technique, all the Italian stuff, and lower larynx and all that, which is fine, but that's just one style. And
right.
And you know, I think we're unfortunately in a generation where that was still true, that was widely taught, and I think that's no longer the case because science has finally caught up to contemporary voice technique, and so I think you'll see more and more of that being taught. Hopefully, because
hopefully seeing more of it.
Yeah, because we were just taught one style, but I think the cool thing is now, like, there's enough science to technically give someone the same exact foundation from a completely contemporary pop perspective. Because someone who's singing in the bel canto style, they wouldn't be able to sing on a mic on the radio, do a pop song, if that's the only thing they've been trained to do.
Right.
So it's like, you know, and even for me as someone who does a lot of musical theater, even the pop stuff is hard for me because it's like, there's so much less to it. So the differences in styles, I think, is important. And that's another thing that I think riffing does, is gives you that exploration. It gives you permission to explore so that you can open your mind to different styles, and they can all be a part of your vocabulary. But yeah, I do hope to see more teachers doing contemporary voice.
Yeah, it's just across the board. It's like whether you're a producer or you're a teacher or you're, you know, wherever you land, creating something new and pushing people towards something new is kind of the theme of what's happening all across the board. And, you know, and new shows, new writing, new, you know, just kind of, and maybe new is not the right word, but different, I would say different, you know, because it's just, we're still in theater, we're still in this industry, but showing something different, highlighting different things, different people is like super important, especially in underrepresented communities for sure. And so, yeah, hopefully we'll have a generation of students who are like, yep, I learned from Vishal Vaidya and that's how I got my start. And this is why I demanded to do a show about, you know, my heritage rather than be in South Pacific for the umpteenth time. So
we'll see.
I hope so. I think it will, you know, why not? So where can people follow you, learn about your studio, to take a class, or just to follow you in October for Rifftober? You know, where can people find you?
Yeah, I mean, the main place I am is on Instagram. I think you can find me on Instagram at Vishgram, Vish Graham. And I'm also on Twitter at Tweets by Vish, and on TikTok at Coach Vish. Yeah, you can follow me. You can DM me if you're interested in lessons. I am about to start a Facebook community for my voice studio as well, but I think for now I'm just going to keep that private to my already students. But if you're interested in
cool.
teaching work or anything, follow me on Instagram and everywhere else.
Cool. All right. Well, thank you for your time today. I really appreciate you coming on, and it's always good to see your face and hear from you and see what's going on. And hopefully this is the beginning of you coming as a guest many times in the future to talk about whatever may be the button issue at that time. And
Great. Thank you for having me, B-Man.
All righty. I will see you soon.
Bye.
Thanks for listening to today's episode of the Producing While Asian podcast. Our theme song was created by Luckstock. We are produced by Press Play Podcast, and the show is edited by Michael Santos Sandoval. If you have a moment, please leave a review and a rating, and be sure to send us any topic ideas you have to producingwhileasian@gmail.com. To follow us, stay updated, and read our blog, visit www.producingwhileasian.com. We hope you join us again soon.